Bosphorus Gambit, a Sarah Hawthorne thriller. Chapter 1. London Calling. The incessant patter of rain against the windows of Vauxhall Cross did little to muffle the chaos unfolding within. Sarah Hawthorne, her dark hair pulled back in a severe ponytail, stood before a wall of flickering screens, her green eyes darting from one feed to another. Despite having left MI6 3 years ago, the familiar tension in her shoulders told her that old habits die hard. "There," she muttered, finger jabbing at a particular stream of data. "That's not standard chatter." Her former colleague, James, leaned in, squinting at the code. "Good eye, sir, but you shouldn't be here, you know? You're not exactly on the payroll anymore." Sarah ignored him, her focus laser-sharp on the anomaly she'd spotted. This isn't just some low-level operative. The encryption is too sophisticated. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, initiating a decryption sequence she developed during her final year with the agency. As the algorithm worked its magic, fragments of the message began to appear. Material pollution, Volkov, dirty bomb. Sarah's blood ran cold. Nuclear material obtained, Volkov, dirty bomb, she translated, her voice barely above a whisper. James paled beside her. "Christ, Sarah, if this is genuine." "It is," she cut him off, already reaching for her phone. "Get me Carlisle now." 30 minutes later, Sarah found herself in a soundproofed office, face-to-face with MI6 Section Chief Carlisle. The portly man regarded her with a mixture of respect and wariness. "You understand what you're proposing?" Hawthorne, coming back in, even temporarily, after the way you left. Sarah leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. "Sir, with all due respect, we don't have time for bureaucracy. Someone out there has nuclear material and intends to use it. I'm your best shot at stopping them." Carlisle sighed, rubbing his temples. "You always were a pain in my arse, Hawthorne, but you're right." He slid a file across the desk. "What do you need?" Sarah allowed herself a grim smile as she flipped open the dossier. "A ticket to Paris, for starters, and reinstatement of all my old clearances." As she left Vauxhall Cross, the weight of a restored badge heavy in her pocket, Sarah knew her quiet life was over. The game was afoot, and the stakes had never been higher. Chapter 2. Parisian Depths. The Parisian dawn painted the sky in hues of pink and gold as Sarah Hawthorne wove through the narrow streets of Montmartre. Her eyes scanned the crowd, searching for faces that didn't belong among the early morning artists and cafe-goers. A burner phone buzzed in her pocket. The message was terse: Catacombs, Denford Rochereau, 1 hour. Sarah's lips tightened. The Paris catacombs, a literal maze of death beneath the city of light. Perfect for clandestine meetings and ambushes. An hour later, Sarah descended into the dank tunnels, the chill seeping through her light jacket. The tourist section was long behind her as she navigated the lesser-known passages, relying on memorized maps and subtle markers left by her contact. A whisper echoed off the bone-lined walls. "Agent Hawthorne." Sarah spun, hand instinctively reaching for a concealed weapon. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall, lean, with a face that seemed carved from granite. "Dmitri," Sarah acknowledged. "What do you have for me?" The Russian's eyes darted nervously. "It's worse than we thought. The stolen material, it's not just any nuclear waste. It's weapons grade." Sarah's breath caught. "Who's behind this?" "Viktor Volkov." Dmitri's voice dripped with fear and disgust. Ex-KGB, now an oligarch with more money than God and a grudge against the West. A distant echo made them both tense. Footsteps, growing closer. "We're compromised," Sarah hissed. Move. They raced through the tunnels, the sound of pursuit growing louder. Sarah's mind raced, mapping their escape route. They burst out of a maintenance exit, emerging into the bustling streets near Montmartre. Split up, Sarah commanded. I'll draw them off. As Dmitri melted into the crowd, Sarah sprinted towards the iconic white domes of Sacre-Cœur. She weaved through throngs of tourists, acutely aware of the heavy footfalls behind her. A flash of metal caught her. One pursuer had drawn a weapon. Sarah ducked into the nearest alley, hearing the suppressed pop of gunfire and the ping of bullets ricocheting off stone. She vaulted over a low wall, landing in a small courtyard. A service door stood ajar her escape route. As she slipped inside, Sarah allowed herself a grim smile. She was back in the game, for better or worse. In a quiet cafe an hour later, Sarah nursed a coffee and took stock. Volkov, a name she knew all too well. If he was involved, this was bigger than a simple dirty bomb plot. Her phone buzzed with an encrypted message. Berlin, Teufelsberg, 48 hours. Sarah drained her coffee and stood. The city of light had given her a glimpse of the darkness to come. Now the trail led to Germany, and time was running out. Chapter 3. Berlin, Betrayal. The wind whipped across Teufelsberg Hill, rustling through the trees surrounding the abandoned NSA listening station. Sarah Hawthorne crouched in the shadows, studying the dilapidated structure. Once a bastion of Cold War espionage, now it stood as a graffiti-covered relic and potentially the key to unraveling Volkov's plot. Her comm unit crackled to life. In position came the whispered voice of Karl, her Berlin contact. No sign of activity. Sarah frowned. It felt too easy. Maintain surveillance. I'm going in. She moved silently across the open ground, using the long shadows of dusk for cover. The rusted door yielded to her lock-picking skills, and Sarah slipped inside. The interior was a maze of decay, healing paint, broken equipment, and the musty smell of abandonment. Sarah navigated carefully, her flashlight beam revealing glimpses of Cold War ghosts. In what was once the main control room, Sarah froze. A modern laptop sat incongruously on a dust-covered desk, a cable snaking from it to an old terminal. Carl, she whispered into her comm. I've found something. They're tapping into the old system somehow. Static answered her. Sarah's instincts screamed danger. The crack of a gunshot confirmed her fears. Sarah dove for cover as bullets peppered the room. Through the chaos, she glimpsed her attacker Karl, his face twisted in a sneer. Sorry, Hawthorne, he called out, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. Volkov, he's better than MI6. Sarah's mind raced. The laptop, she needed that intel. In one fluid motion, she pulled the flashbang from her belt, tossed it towards Karl, and lunged for the computer. The explosion of light and sound gave her the seconds she needed. Clutching the laptop, Sarah crashed through a window, glass shards raining around her, as she hit the ground running. Karl's shouts faded behind her as Sarah sprinted towards the East Side Gallery. The stretch of the Berlin Wall, now an open-air art exhibit, offered her best chance at losing her pursuer in the evening crowds. She weaved through tourists admiring the murals, the laptop a dead weight under her arm. A glance back showed Karl gaining ground, his gun barely concealed. Sarah's eyes locked on a tour group ahead. With a silent apology, she barreled into them, causing a domino effect of confusion. In the chaos, she slipped the laptop into an unsuspecting tourist's backpack, palming a GPS tracker onto it in the same motion. Ducking into a nearby U-Bahn station, Sarah allowed herself a moment to catch her breath. Her burner phone buzzed a message from her MI6 handler. Compromise confirmed. Extraction team, en route, rendezvous at checkpoint Charlie in 30 minutes. Sarah closed her eyes, the weight of betrayal settling on her shoulders. Karl's defection meant Volkov's reach was longer than they'd realized. The game had changed, and as she merged into the flow of commuters, Sarah knew that Istanbul would be more than just the next stop. It would be where everything came to a head. With a final glance over her shoulder, she boarded the train. The doors closed, taking her towards an uncertain rendezvous and the next deadly phase of her mission. Chapter 4: Istanbul, Intrigue. The cacophony of the Grand Bazaar enveloped Sarah as she wove through its labyrinthine passages. The scent of spices and leather mixed with the press of bodies and the constant hum of haggling. Perfect cover, but also the ideal place to lose a tail or be ambushed. Her contact's message had been cryptic. The songbird sings at the old fountain. It had taken Sarah half a day to decipher it, leading her to this ancient marketplace at the heart of Istanbul. As she approached the Sevahir Bedesten, the oldest part of the bazaar, Sarah's instincts prickled. A man in a dark suit stood out among the tourists and locals, his eyes scanning the crowd with too much intent. She casually changed direction, using a group of American tourists as cover. The old fountain came into view, its intricate Ottoman designs barely visible under centuries of wear. And there, perched on its edge, was a small mechanical bird, the kind of trinket sold in 1,000 stalls throughout the bazaar. Sarah approached cautiously, aware of the suited man still in her peripheral vision. As she reached for the bird, its beak opened, emitting a tinny, pre-recorded whistle. The sound triggered a memory. It was a code she'd learned years ago. Coordinates. The bird's song was giving her coordinates. A commotion erupted behind her. Sarah turned to see the suited man pushing through the crowd, hand reaching inside his jacket. No time to finesse it, she snatched the bird and ran. The chase through the Grand Bazaar became a blur of color and sound. Sarah vaulted over display tables, sending carpets and trinkets flying. She ducked through doorways barely wider than her shoulders, emerging into sunlit courtyards only to plunge back into the maze of shops. A flash of inspiration hit her as she passed a spice stall. Sarah grabbed a handful of red pepper flakes and flung them behind her. The pained shouts of her pursuer confirmed her aim was true. Finally breaking free of the bazaar, Sarah sprinted towards the Bosphorus. The coordinates led to the water. The bomb must be on a boat. As she ran, she keyed a frantic message to her MI6 handler. Target confirmed, Bosphorus Strait, need immediate backup. Reaching the waterfront, Sarah scanned the horizon. Dozens of vessels crisscrossed the strait, from tiny fishing boats to massive tankers. One of them carried a weapon that could poison these waters for generations. A voice called out behind her. "Agent Hawthorne, your tenacity is admirable, but futile." Sarah turned slowly, facing the suited man from the bazaar. He wasn't alone. Flanking him were two burly guards, their weapons barely concealed under light jackets. "Volkov sends his regards," the man continued, a cold smile playing on his lips. "He thought you might make it this far now. You have a choice: walk away, or take a swim in the Bosphorus permanently." Sarah's mind raced, calculating angles, escape routes, and the likelihood of backup arriving in time. The bomb was out there, ticking away on some nondescript vessel. Time was running out, for her and for millions of innocent lives. She took a deep breath, hands raised in apparent surrender. "Well," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins, "I've always enjoyed a good swim." In that moment of confusion, Sarah made her move. The real game was just beginning. and the waters of the Bosphorus would soon become her battlefield. Chapter 5. Bosphorus Countdown. Sarah's muscles screamed as she cut through the choppy waters of the Bosphorus. The suit jacket she discarded moments before hitting the water had bought her precious seconds of confusion from Volkov's men. Now, as bullets peppered the water around her, she knew her gamble had only partially paid off. A small fishing boat approached, its captain shouting in Turkish. Sarah waved frantically, relief flooding through her as she recognized the prearranged signal. MI-6 had come through. As she was hauled aboard, gasping and dripping, her handler, Jenkins, thrust a tablet into her hands. "We've narrowed it down to 3 vessels based on the coordinates and recent anomalous activity," he said, all business. "You've got less than an hour before the first one leaves Turkish waters." Sarah scanned the information, her wet hair plastered to her face. "There," she pointed. "The cargo ship, it's registered to a shell company I traced back to Volkov in Berlin." The fishing boat's engine roared to life, setting course for the hulking freighter in the distance. Sarah quickly stripped off her wet clothes, donning tactical gear stashed on board. As she checked her weapons, Jenkins briefed her on the extraction plan. "Our window is narrow," he warned. "Turkish authorities are scrambling to close the strait if that bomb goes off." "It won't," Sarah cut him off, her voice steel. As they neared the freighter, Sarah could see figures moving on deck, armed guards. With practiced efficiency, she attached a grappling hook to a pneumatic launcher. "Good luck," Jenkins said simply. Sarah nodded, then fired. The hook sailed upward, catching on the ship's railing. In seconds, she was scaling the hull, the wind whipping around her. She vaulted over the railing, immediately taking cover behind a stack of containers. 2 guards rounded the corner, and Sarah moved with lethal precision. A chokehold for one, a swift kick to the knee, and a punch to the solar plexus for the other. Both were unconscious before they could raise the alarm. Silently, Sarah made her way towards the bridge, neutralizing 2 more guards en route. The ship's manifest, quickly accessed on a computer terminal, pointed her to a specific container in the hold. As she descended into the bowels of the ship, the hairs on the back of her neck stood up. It was too quiet. Suddenly, slow clapping echoed through the metal corridor. "Impressive, Agent Hawthorne, truly." The cultured voice sent a chill down Sarah's spine. Viktor Volkov stepped out of the shadows, flanked by 4 heavily armed mercenaries. "But I'm afraid your mission ends here." Sarah's mind raced. Volkov's presence meant the bomb was definitely on board. She just had to get past him and his men, disarm a nuclear device, and prevent an ecological catastrophe. All in the next 15 minutes. "Why Volkov?" she asked, playing for time. "You stand to lose as much as anyone if you poison these waters." Volkov's smile was cold. "Sometimes, to remake the world, we must first break it now. Shall we do this the easy way, or—" Sarah's flashbang grenade answered his question, arcing through the air before he could finish his sentence. The resulting chaos was her chance. She dove and rolled, coming up firing. 2 mercenaries went down, but return fire forced her behind a bulkhead. The ship's hull rang with gunfire and shouts. Through the chaos, Sarah spotted a half-open door with hazard warnings plastered across it. The bomb. It was now or never. She broke cover, sprinting for the door as bullets whizzed past. Pain exploded in her left arm a graze, but she ignored it. Sarah slammed the door behind her, quickly wedging it shut with a piece of broken equipment. And there it was. A compact nuclear device. its digital display showing less than 5 minutes until detonation. The same numbers that meant destruction for millions now became Sarah's lifeline. 5 minutes to save a city, to prevent an ecological disaster, to stop Volkov's insane plan. With steady hands belying her racing heart, Sarah set to work. Outside, she could hear Volkov's men try to break down the door. But for Sarah, the world narrowed to wires, circuits, and the steadily descending numbers on the bomb's display. This was what she was trained for. This was why she had come back. With sweat beading on her brow and the taste of coppery adrenaline in her mouth, Sarah Hawthorne prepared to defeat death one more time. Chapter 6: Fallout. The gentle lapping of waves against the shore was a stark contrast to the chaos of the past few days. Sarah sat on a secluded beach on the outskirts of Istanbul, her arm freshly bandaged, watching the sun set over the Bosphorus. The strait flowed on, oblivious to how close it had come to devastation. Her burner phone buzzed. It was Jenkins. "Hawthorne," he said, his voice a mix of exhaustion and relief. "The Turkish authorities have Volkov in custody. His network is unraveling as we speak." Sarah allowed herself a small smile. "And the bomb?" "Safely disarmed and in our possession. Your work in that hold, it was exemplary." The compliment hung in the air, reminding Sarah of all she'd left behind when she'd walked away from MI6 3 years ago, and all she'd put at risk by coming back. "What about Carl?" she asked, thinking of her Berlin betrayal. Jenkins sighed. "In the wind, but we'll find him. He can't hide forever." Sarah's mind raced, connecting dots from London to Paris to Berlin to Istanbul. This was bigger than Volkov, wasn't it? He was just a pawn. A long pause. "We believe so," Jenkins finally admitted. "The encryption you cracked in London, it goes deeper than we thought. There's chatter about something called Project Prometheus." Sarah stood, brushing sand from her clothes. "So it's not over?" "No," Jenkins agreed. "In fact, it may be just beginning. The question is, Hawthorne, are you back in?" The weight of the decision pressed down on Sarah. The quiet life she'd built, the peace she'd found, all of it hung in the balance. But so did the lives of countless innocent people who would never know how close they'd come to disaster. She thought of the adrenaline rush as she disarmed the bomb, the satisfaction of outwitting Volkov, the feeling of making a real difference. It was addictive, this life. And perhaps it was who she truly was. "I'm in," Sarah said, her voice firm. "But on my terms, I work independently, and I choose my missions." "Agreed," Jenkins replied, relief evident in his voice. "We'll set up a secure line. Your first briefing on Project Prometheus will be in 48 hours. As the call ended, Sarah looked out over the water once more. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving streaks of orange and purple in the sky. A new chapter was beginning, one filled with danger, intrigue, and the chance to make the world a little safer. Sarah Hawthorne squared her shoulders and turned away from the sea. There was work to be done, and she was ready for whatever came next. The game was afoot once more, and this time she was playing for keeps. In the gathering dusk, she disappeared into the streets of Istanbul, just another shadow in a city of millions. But unlike those around her, Sarah carried the weight of secrets, the burden of knowledge, and the power to shape the future. The fallout from her decision would ripple across the globe. Project Prometheus awaited, and with it, a web of conspiracy that would test every skill she possessed. But for now, in this moment, Sarah allowed herself to savor the victory and prepare for the battles to come. The end.